Here we go. We got the co-founder and CEO of VueMotion, Ryan Talbot, with us today on AI with Alec. And thankfully, we get to go back to the world of sport, artificial intelligence in the real world, giving computers eyes, all sorts of cool, awesome, nerdy stuff that guys like me love. And I'm sure guys like you, Ryan, love as well. So thanks for joining us on AI with Alec. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks for having me on. And the last few podcasts I've done has been very focused on sports science and biomechanics. So it's actually good to really go under the cover a little bit and talk a little bit more about the data and the technology side of things.
Well, let's get right to it because, as you know, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit, off camera before, turning the camera on here. I am a massive nerd in the area of data modeling and the way that I think that data can be used today and harnessed go forward is beyond fascinating because of the power of these genius machines and LLMs and so on and so forth. So let's kind of jump in and you're talking to an audience that is quite sophisticated on the technology front. And then there's also folks that aren't there yet, but they're, really sophisticated, but they're not technical. So why don't you start by just describing, VueMotion and helping folks understand at a high level, how you guys create value for all the awesome sports clients that you have and customers and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. So VueMotion is a computer vision AI machine learning technology. So we take video and we turn that video into deep insights around how athletes move. So traditionally, a lot of testing, as an example, has been done in a lab. And it's really been around the academic space of being able to capture how people move. So what we've done is really taken video to a whole new level. So being able to understand how athletes and players move in their natural environment relative to their sport. So how they accelerate, how they run, how they decelerate, change direction, how they jump. So it's all done from an iPhone and then pushed up into the cloud. And then what the cloud does and what we've developed is some algorithms to really understand how they move relative to their sport.
I love that. And so now for all sports fans, right? And let's use the NFL because I love football and I'm sure lots of folks do. We've all seen videos and it's a television event now, the NFL draft combine, and it's kind of interesting to watch. And sometimes when folks slow it down, you can see, to your point, the motion of one ball player versus another and so on and so forth. But one of the things that caught my attention, and you go as deep into this as you'd like, Ryan, is I imagine that if you have all of that data and all of that video, and if you start to combine that, you probably see patterns, and those patterns could potentially lead to, predictive kind of conclusions about, hey, this player might get a little bit better by doing the following things a little bit differently or better, or hey, this player could recover a little bit faster because of the following characteristics in the way their body is constructed in the motion. And so let's geek out a little bit on this stuff, especially in terms of the implications of that data set and therefore how it can optimize performance, maybe avoid injury, these types of things.
Yeah, definitely. So if we look at how people move in their natural environment, we're combining kinematics and kinetics here. And so to give you an example, just to put things into perspective, when someone accelerates and off the mark speed, let's take an NFL player. It's a game of 10 yards.
Yep.
First 3 steps is around 12 times their body weight of ground reaction forces. So it's quite significant. When they're decelerating, each step, the initial steps are around 6 times their body weight of ground reaction forces. So it's important to be able to do that properly. And really what VueMotion is doing is being able to break down what's happening with the body kinematics, but also ground-based measures as well. And that's really important to be able to understand things like braking forces and where their limbs are and how they're positioning their limbs. So what we're finding as we're building out huge data sets is that when we look at performance and the physics of how someone moves, or if we look at injuries as an example, that quite often they're biomechanical deficiencies. And a lot of people are just not taught how to move properly, and then they get put into professional sport and there's a lot of things happening, but just the basics of how they're moving. Like as an example, there's one ball and everyone else is running and changing direction and decelerating. So that's a big part of the game that has sort of been missed in the past just because of the restrictions of the technology that's been available in a natural environment. And it's difficult to be able to get them into a lab, and a lab is very different, with the surface and with the shoes and different things that are being assessed in a natural environment. And that's what we've really tried to do, is look at really how they are moving in the natural environment, specifically to how they would move in a game.
That's awesome. And double click on that a little bit further, right? So natural environment, meaning at practice, during the actual game, and being able to review and perhaps make recommendations and tweaks on the fly. I guess I wonder if you might want to walk the audience through for example, and you don't have to get into specifics, but I know it's public information that you've got some extraordinary clients across major professional sport leagues. So I'll just leave it to you how specific you want to get or you're comfortable getting, but go for it.
Yeah, I think like a big part of our focus is really being able to assess movement profiling. So to be able to design specific athletic-based movements, to be able to see how they move specifically to that task. So, if we take acceleration off the mark speed as an example, that's something that we can look at, running quite easily. We don't need to go into a lab, but we're able to break down on a step-by-step perspective. And really what we're getting is huge data sets, like, tens of thousands of points of data as they're doing that. And that gives us really, really good insights into how they're actually moving and the opportunities to be able to change what they're doing, to be able to work with coaches and practitioners to be able to say, okay, well, this is a bit of a red flag that you need to know about, and to be able to act on that as well.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I guess not to switch gears, but I forgot to ask the founding story, because I was really impressed when you and I first connected about your background as well as your co-founders, and kind of just the little bit of the aha moment. I wonder if we could just back up for a sec. I should have started there. I apologize. But I wonder if you could help the audience understand, like, how did you guys come up with this and start developing it, and just bring us along the journey a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So look, that's a great question. I think, I spent my career 25 years in technology and security consulting. So working across government and casinos, law enforcement, smart city applications, and critical infrastructure. So I've done a lot with video and biometrics and identity. I've worked in that very high-tech space where we're really pushing the boundaries. And in the security space, that like it has to, but within sports tech, it was sort of well behind. We're seeing technologies that are over 20 years old still being used for decision making in performance and for injury management, but there's been no context with it. And something that everyone has is a smartphone and video, and it's the most used tool. But I also spent 15, 20 years actually now, working in the sports performance space. So coaching sprinters, hurdlers, relays. So track and field sort of was my passion. But the big problem that I had is I was spending about 5 to 6 hours every week trying to cut out shapes and try and figure out how my athletes were moving. I become obsessed with biomechanics and just being able to understand that. So that was a big problem that, I had. But as part of sort of my journey, I reached out to so many different coaches. I think I interviewed well over 100 coaches, or anyone that would talk to me, just to see what the problems they had. And the problems were far bigger than, the problems that I had as well, around how decisions were made from an athlete, a coach, a physio, strength and conditioning coach, or anyone that worked within that ecosystem. But there was no easy way of getting objective data. Mm-hmm. So I really realized then that, okay, well, there's a huge opportunity here across all levels of sport, to be able to really provide a simple solution. So complex in the back end, but just being able to simplify that so coaches and practitioners and athletes could really understand what the problems were and what they needed to do to change it.
Right on. And I'm sure along the way, so I love when folks, this is another thing I mentioned to you in our previous call, is I love when folks solve their own problems, right? And then build a business around it. Because it just, again, it's really inspiring, because you obviously have an infinite, interest in solving that problem. And there's lots of other folks that have similar problems, and, here we go. But what have you learned along the way because the sport industry is a unique industry, right? And I could use an air quote on the unique side of things as a guy who has been in and around it kind of all of my career as well. But what have you learned along the way in regards to identifying the problem and then the willingness to try to solve the problem, as well as that technical quotient that you alluded to, that the industry is not necessarily the most advanced and mature in relation to maybe some other industries?
Yeah, so I'll take it back to, what I was talking about before when I was trying to solve a problem around looking at things like shapes and how they're connecting with the ground. And I really found that, all the time that I spent on that, I thought I had it all figured out until I actually had the data to really help me understand it a lot better. And so we created basically kinograms. So we've trained our system over millions of frames of video to be able to identify key points of the gait cycle or key patterns to be able to provide angles and other metrics off the back of that. And now we have objective data to really start to make sense of it, where previously it was just very subjective, and we're looking at it and there's always a certain bias to that, what you've learned or what you think but now what I'm seeing is that teams are able to make much better decisions, and it's taking away a lot of opinions as well, because I can tell you now, like physiotherapists and performance coaches have very different opinions, but when they have the data and they're all sitting down just going through the VueMotion data together, it has really helped them make better decisions on, return to performance and what they need to do. So we can now start to put athletes in specific buckets of how they're moving to be able to say, okay, this is how we need to work with this group of people because this is what we've identified. So I think we've learned a lot from that as we're building large data sets across so many different sports and so many different levels of sport. It's really helping us understand what's working and what's not, really.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right? Bringing objective truth and first principles into the equation. And as we talked about as well, the every time different folks interact with the system and its intelligence, it gets stronger and stronger and better and more useful, I'm sure, to not just your current customers, but future customers, et cetera. So when you think about the explosive growth that we've seen in the world of frontier models, which I'm not going to go so far as to suggest they're stabilizing. But, the GPT-5 launch has been reviewed accordingly, and I'll just leave it there. Everyone's got a point of view on that. But the bottom line is LLMs are a very exciting, development, and I wonder, how are you guys thinking about the future of the company go forward as you continue to grow, and I know you're bringing in more capital and so on and so forth? How are you thinking about LLMs as part of your technical and or business roadmap?
Yeah, look, LLMs, NLP and LLMs sort of a big area that we're looking at from an interpretation perspective. And I see a really good opportunity from a hybrid perspective. So to give you an example of, how we're thinking about this is really around how can we basically look at a lot of the key research that's out there, and to be able to analyze that research, and then to be able to help really interpret how the data is being contextualized to simplify it as much as possible, so it can be read like a children's book, if that makes sense. So what we're really focusing on now is to be able to look at how we can provide easy information of what they need to know. And if you look at an F1 car as well, there's so much data coming out of an F1 car, but really they just need to know what they need to know. They don't need to know everything, right? So we're really now looking at how can we pull out the key information to simplify that as much as possible. And what we've really built on over the last sort of 3 to 6 months is really a framework around 5 key pillars around what it is, what it means, how to fix it, and then does the athlete or coach understand it, and is it working, is it progressing or regressing? So looking at every aspect of those 5 key pillars really helps understand by applying that framework to how we're actually using data, using LLMs to be able to help interpret that data. So I really see a hybrid model of where we're building our own truth tables based on a lot of research and the data that we're getting and the information we're getting from a lot of these professional teams, and then using other LLMs to be able to help with the interpretation of that as well.
I love that. That's a tremendous framework, and I also think it's important, to keep it quote unquote simple, right? Because the world doesn't necessarily need, a gazillion different dimensions of data and whatnot, but it needs the insights that actually move the needle. And to your point of the implications, so that's awesome. And as you guys think about, your growth trajectory and where things are headed, are you doubling down on certain, sport and or industry? Are you expanding, into other territories? Like, how are you thinking about the next 12, 24, 36 months sounds like an eternity in this world, but like 12, 24 months, like where's the growth, focus and prioritization kind of map in your mind?
Yeah, so the last 12 to 18 months has really been focused on being race bred to be able to analyze at the time and over time, like professional level athletes, some of the best athletes on earth, to really build a race bred model. And then as we're building out these data sets and having a look at, what's happening over time, whether it's performance, whether, occurrences of injuries or from a return to performance perspective, now that we have a fully scalable model that's cloud-based, that is all you need is a phone, and we can thank the likes of Apple and Samsung and GoPro as well, that everyone has access to technologies that they don't need to go out and buy sophisticated technology, where they can just use something like their smartphone. That allows us to be able to provide lab grade analysis out in the natural environment, whether it's a court, whether it's a track, whether it's on grass or any other surface, to then be able to scale that across all areas, from academies and colleges and universities right down to schools and grassroots sports.
I love that. And I think it's such a fascinating and interesting territory because, the sport that I love playing is tennis, for example, is one of them. And I always, kind of joke about how much I would love to see more of the video of myself performing, and therefore how I can improve, and being able to compare that to all of these wonderful data sets. I just think you're onto something really special and exciting. I guess just I want to be cognizant of time, and just thinking about where the puck is headed with all of this. Is there anything that you want to share that speaks to the next level of growth and the profile of partners, investors, ecosystem players that you're cultivating? Because I know my network in particular and audience and followers are, quite switched on in these areas. And I'm always looking to interview folks that are doing really interesting things, but also, of course, those that, can benefit the audience and vice versa. So, by all means, feel free to let it rip if there's anything that you want to share, before we get to wrapping up here about the trajectory of the business and what you're looking to do next.
Yeah, definitely. So I think to start with, over the last, especially 3 to 5 years, we've seen this big shift in analog technologies to what we can now do with the likes of computer vision, AI, machine learning.
Yeah.
And we see movement as a language that actually needs to be taught. And, we've got so much research out there. We've got English Premier League teams and US soccer that just released a paper recently. A lot of universities are doing research. We're sponsoring PhDs. So we're really at the forefront of understanding movement and really being able to teach movement as well, because that's really important. If you're not taught how to move properly, we know there's a cumulative effect that can get you injured. And, if you look at, we'll take NFL as an example, like the cost as an average of one player sitting out, unable to play, costs them about $194,000 per game. And this is about being able to manage their assets properly. They haven't really been able to do that in a lot of ways until this type of technology has been available. So that's sort of probably the first part of that, to be able to teach movement across all areas of life, whether it's sport or even beyond that as well. And, we're really focused on, our goal to be able to analyze 1 million plus people a day using computer vision, machine learning to be able to change lives. We're seeing the lives of athletes and players being changed significantly with faster return of performance and less injuries. And we've got Major League Baseball teams saying we've had no running related injuries this year. And like baseball is a very data driven sport. It's arguably the most data driven sport. In fact, some of the major league teams have up to like 20 data analysts just bringing data together. But video is actually providing so much context to that. And it actually gets a lot of player buy-in as well, which I think is really important because, they're not just getting a number because there's so much data just giving them numbers, but they have to understand it. And this is where I think what we're seeing over the next 12 to 18 months, when we're talking about LLMs, when we're talking about what we can do with huge data sets to be able to understand how people move relative to who they are. And I think that's important as well. And then, as a company, being able to really scale out as much as possible because this is really going to change the next generation of people within sport. Injuries like an ACL injury will put someone out for a season, but it also has ongoing effects in life as they stop playing sports. So to be able to change a lot of lives and to be able to provide technology like this to make a difference, that's what we're really focused on.
I love it. I love the way you described it, the language of movement and whatnot, because obviously to your point, video is we as humans, right? Video communicates a whole lot more effectively than what's found in a spreadsheet. And codifying that language and then helping the machines understand the language and vice versa. I think you're onto something really special. So, Ryan, I really appreciate your time, as I'm sure my followers and audience will as well. But thanks again, and best of luck to you. And I'm excited to publish this one so folks can learn all about VueMotion.
Absolute pleasure, and thanks for having me on.
You bet. Take care.